I'm the Book Baron. If you're new here, my name is Baron, and today we are wrapping up everything that I read in October, which, to be honest, isn't that much. At least for me. Normally I read 15 plus books a month, and today I think I maybe have 6 for you. It was a bit of a weird reading month, mostly because in the middle, well, not in the middle, during most of this month I was in Japan, and I didn't touch my Kindle the entire time I was there. So I didn't get much reading done, but the reading I did do, it was some big books. It was some big books. Most of them appeared in my vlog, so some of these are not going to be new. I will try and be brief and quickly go over those ones as much as I can. You know how I love to gab, so outlook's not great. Also, hopefully you can't hear Kevin's crunching. He decided that now's the time to eat for some reason. All this to say, I don't have that many books for you. I will try and briefly go over the ones that were in the vlog. I'll also link that up here so you can see my very in-depth thoughts. And then I'll go over all of the other ones that I read that I have not yet talked to you about. Without further ado, let's just jump into things, shall we? First book that appeared in that reading vlog for this month, I have difficulty holding without covering up the title and the name of the author. So it's No Tomorrow by Carrie Cole. And now my hand's gonna go back over it because it's just too awkward to try and grip it up here. This is a standalone. I think there is or was maybe plans to make this an interconnected series or duet, but for now it's a standalone. That may change. It's rockstar mental health, addiction, surprise pregnancy, and I'm telling you that because the synopsis won't. You're welcome. Doing the Lord's work over here. This is about our heroine, Piper, who's in her early 20s. She's kind of in that process of like starting to launch life. She's still living at her parents' house. She doesn't quite have a job that's great. It pays some of the bills at least, not enough to move out, obviously. So she just doesn't have a ton of friends. She hasn't really like found her footing at her job or made friends there. And so she eats her lunch in the park every day. And that's how she ends up running into a very attractive busker named Blue, who is always there as well. And they forge this friendship over days and days and weeks of seeing each other every day. Eventually she does learn that this busker is unhoused. At some point, he does unfortunately move on very abruptly just when she thinks she's falling in love. 5 years later, he turns up in the last place she expected him to. She's hearing him on the radio. He is now a famous lead singer for this kind of like up and coming band. She kind of has a way to get back in contact with him. So she ends up buying a backstage pass to an upcoming concert in her area. And she plans to reunite with him. But, you know, obviously aforementioned mental health and drug addiction issues, they're going to cause some challenges. So if you've seen the vlog, I did not really enjoy this book. It had all the right ingredients. It's toxic, it's a hot-cold relationship, damaged here, we've got mental health. I love all that stuff. I love a heroine that feels isolated, unseen. She can't get her shit together. Like, I love a heroine like that that's like trying so hard to get life launched and it's just not quite there. Delicious, juicy. I love that. There's 2 major things that prevented me from really liking this, and the biggest issue truly is we did not get enough of the hero's perspective. We did not get enough of him wrestling with the drug addiction, talking about how the mental health was impacting him, how he was making decisions based on that, maybe how that led to him being unhoused, maybe how the mental health informs his drug addiction or vice versa. We didn't really get a lot of that. A lot of this is from Piper's perspective. So I don't have a lot of sympathy or empathy for his decisions because the main perspective I'm getting is the person that's being directly hurt by those decisions. It just kind of like wrecked a lot of the relationship development. I kind of felt like he was this deadbeat dad, and I just felt like if I could just get some insight into how he's processing all of these things happening in his life, maybe I could get on board with him, but I couldn't because I just wanted to protect Piper. I wanted someone better for Piper. I wanted someone that made better decisions, especially because we have a kid in the mix. As a result, I just didn't really love the romance either. They talked about how it's this big, beautiful love. I didn't feel it. And again, I think part of that is we're just not getting a lot of processing of emotion, and we're not getting a lot of insight into both of their internal thoughts, because I understood everything kind of on this like academic level, because there was a lot of telling and not showing me things. I understood, but I didn't feel, if that makes sense. For example, they went to a concert and Piper says something like, everyone was enraptured by his performance. Cool. I can understand that. You know what would have been better though, is talking about, you know, that feeling right before the singer starts singing or the first chord is strummed. When you're at a concert, there's this anticipation building, it's frenetic building of emotion. And then when you hear those first notes of the song, that relief of tension and how amazing that is that you're feeling that in a crowd, describing that would have been so much cooler. Then I would have felt it. Then I would have been in it. This book to me read very average, which sucks. it sucks because I think there's so much good about this, which is definitely why I want to read more from Carrie Ann Cole. Now, I'm saying all of this. I know that the telling, not showing doesn't bother a lot of people. Hannah Bottom Young does a ton of it, and she's a bestseller. If this sounds like a good book to you, give it a go. Rating, 3 stars. All right, next up, I'm gonna skip to the third book that was in that vlog, just because I read another book from the series of the other book that I read, so you'll see in a second. But I read Thy Kingdom Come by Monica James. It's a first in a series. It's a mafia romance, and it's set in Ireland. There's a lot of like revenge and plotting and that sort of a thing. We have Punky, and his mother is very brutally unalived in front of him at a very young age. And now when we meet him in the present day, fast forward, he's working for his father. He's trying to get some incriminating evidence. He's at this party. He's gathered this evidence. He's about to go home and deliver it to his father. And he comes across this woman who's having issues with her motorcycle. I just said motorcycle in the nerdiest way possible. He ends up helping her out and getting her back on the road. And then when he gets home to deliver this evidence to his father, he realizes he doesn't have the evidence, which gets him beat within an inch of his life. So he's already pissed. That would have been bad enough. But also his mother's brooch is missing. And remember, Mommy Dearest is not among the living. So he's really ticked off. He's gonna go find this woman. Thoughts on this? I think a lot of this felt incredibly average. I don't feel like this story was that intriguing, that unique. I think the plot is definitely the strongest piece of it. Who came after his mother? Why did they do it? Why was her death not avenged? I thought that was probably the most interesting portion. A lot of it honestly just felt corny and a little too try hard. Like Punky over-explains what he's doing all the time. And it's like he thinks he's Sherlock Holmes, but he's just like, kind of seems like an overconfident dick. There's a lot of info dumping. There's not a lot to establish the relationship between the two of them. A lot of times they're just like, oh my God, I'm magnetically drawn to this person. Let's book. They also just didn't spend a lot of time together, so whatever their connection is, I clearly don't get it. I mean, shit, they don't get it either. I think like 70, 80, 90% of this book was like super average. The ending was an absolute 1 star. There is some of the wildest choices, the wildest twists I have ever read, and not wild in a good way. As in, that was a bad decision. And if you want to see the full spoilers, it's in the vlog. I fully spoil it. It's the last book in that vlog. Those choices are then also very quickly reversed, so it's very clear that it's like, oh, so that was done for shock value. What's the point? Now I don't trust anything that happens after this. There's no real impact. It felt like utter nonsense. So my rating for that one was 2 stars. Ending really pulled it down. Honestly, that ending made me want to rate it 1 star. Next up, we get to the second book that was in that vlog, because I read books 1, and then after I finished that vlog, I read book 2 as well. I also read this because I was doing it as a part of a read-along with a bunch of other gals, and that is Hollow Heathens by Nicole Fiorina. So this is a first in a series. It's not complete. There's only 2 books out right now. It's sort of a modern paranormal fantasy. There's a little bit of like witchy, spooky, gothic vibes. We have Fallon, whose parents have passed. She's grown up primarily in Texas, but she learns that her grandfather is sick back in her hometown, and so she's gonna go back. The town is called Weeping Hollow, and she doesn't really know a ton about it. She has a little bit of trouble finding it, but it's alluded to that the trouble is not finding it so much as leaving it. Once she gets there, she realizes how odd this town is. There's a lot of mystery. It's very spooky. No one's driving a car. There's a divide between Flatlanders, non-magic people, and the witches. The covens have their own rivalries. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of scheming behind the scenes. And probably the creepiest part is the Hollow Heathens, and the lore goes, these 4 boys have been cursed to wear masks because if you gaze upon their face, more or less you'll die of your greatest fear. You just kind of envision it and then just kick the bucket. Obviously, no one wants that. So they have a lot of mystery, a lot of power around them. They're very feared. Unfortunately, she does attract the attention of one of the Hollow Boys, which is terrible for him because he's trying to break this curse. That's his main driver in life. He just wants to take the damn mask off. And for her, she's just trying to adapt to the small town. And also, she just doesn't want to attract a lot of attention because she's trying to solve this mystery. There's a lot of dead bodies popping up around town, so it's a little bit of a war zone out there. So, thoughts on this? This is incredibly atmospheric. This was the perfect time of year to read this because it's a lot of vibes. There's so much lore. They've got all these like spooky holidays, whimsical balls, and the writing is really poetic, which just adds to the atmosphere. It's like by the sea, and so, or the ocean rather. And so you've kind of got like that element in these dark woods. And so it's got the most lovely atmosphere, and the writing is so lush without being like over the top. It was the best part. If you're not an atmosphere person though, this may fall flat for you. I think in the vlog I described it as like a mashup of Brothers Grimm or Soul to Take, Hollow Boys. Maybe I'll just kind of had a baby, just because there's so much lore, there's so much history to this town. It kind of gives like Salem vibes. The romance, I will say, did take a little time to launch for me. I did have a little bit of a struggle buying into that at first, but then when I saw them kind of like together in action and he makes a fool of himself for her, like then I really saw like the sweetness, the pull. That said, this is not like the most groundbreaking thing ever. Again, atmosphere and the writing are really the standout pieces. So if those don't appeal to you, if you don't care about those things, maybe skip this one. But for the rest of you, this is a very fun spooky season gothic romance. One thing I will say that I only realized in hindsight, this was more so what I realized once I got into book 2, is that although there's a lot of world building and a lot of lore, I don't really understand the magic system. Like I don't know exactly who has power, who can use it, who can't, why those laws are in place. There's a lot of politics, and I understand a lot of the politics that are going on between the founding families and all that. But the magic, I was a little bit like, oh, I don't get it. I know they have to ascend into the coven. There's some missing pieces for me. Now, granted, it's a series, so there more of that could be coming, but that did come back to bite me in book 2. But rating 4 stars, I had a great time with this. This was one of those that because it was like so atmospheric and slow building at the beginning, this was perfect because I could just kind of turn my brain off and enjoy the ride. But now we're getting into the books that were not a part of the vlog. So the first one that I have is the second book in that series, which is Bone Island, once again by Nicole Fiorina. Same vibe, same energy, just different couple. So we've got Adora and Stone, and I'm gonna really struggle to provide a synopsis for this because it's hard for me to parse through what's technically spoilers for the first book. And also like the synopsis that's provided is like, to my beloved Black Sea, it was a full dark when I snuck out of the castle to meet you. It tells you nothing. Adora is from one of the founding families of Weeping Hollow. So normally they're kind of like in these mansions and have these lavish lives. They're kind of now humbled. They've also had tragedy. Her mother is now in a catatonic state. So a lot of her life revolves around taking care of her mother, taking care of her family. Also trying to run the dress shop that she has in town, which is convenient because there's a shit ton of balls at this place. Oh my god, I did not realize how bad that sounded until I was just playing it back for a final run through before I published this. Ugh, my maturity is that of a 12-year-old boy. Anyway, back to it. While all of that's going on, a lot of her life is driven by the need to get revenge for the person that put her mother in a catatonic state. And so a lot of her life has revolved around getting revenge. But unfortunately, that is derailed when it is announced that she is to marry. This completely destroys everything she's been plotting. While all this is going on for Adora, we're getting flashbacks to Stone's life in the 1800s. Just the trials and tribulations of him trying to exist as a person who cannot expose his face. Sound familiar? All the while, he's enduring this kind of like life on the run with his mother, and also having all these visions of this mysterious woman, his mysterious other half. So I was supposed to read this as part of like a read-along with a bunch of other gals. They read both of the books in this series. I didn't get to this book before I left for Japan. I read it when I came back. I'm really glad I didn't read it. Okay, well, apparently I left a few brain cells in Japan. So, I did read the book. That's not what I'm saying. I'm glad I wasn't reading it along with the other gals because I would have been an absolute party pooper. Okay, now back to it. I did not like this book nearly as much. This was a huge disappointment to come back and read that and realize about 50% in, oh, I'm bored. The writing is still beautiful and there's still this like spooky atmosphere, but we don't spend a lot of time in town or with other people. It's pretty isolated to the couple and their families. You just kind of lose a lot of the like whimsy. It loses some of the charm. It just loses some of that charm that I really felt in that first book. Also, just didn't love Adora as much as a character. Adora was kind of supposed to be like bitchy and unlikable and set on revenge and cold, and she felt kind of inconsistent to me at times. She, in her head, is so self-sacrificing. She seems whiny when she's in her head, poor me, poor me. But then her actions, she's so mean to other people because she's just so driven by her need for revenge, what she feels she needs to do, what her duty is, that she just like kind of bulldozes other people. So her outward presentation is very bitchy, which I was kind of like, I kind of get it. Like, you're gonna get some shit done. But also her internal monologue was kind of insufferable. She was just like, oh, poor me, I'm taking on the world. I'm like, have a conversation with like literally one person and they can help you with your burden. Like literally one, like maybe Stone. Maybe the guy that you've proclaimed that you've loved for time and all eternity and through every lifetime. Maybe that guy. Maybe that's the one. It was just a little bit frustrating because she just wasn't a very intriguing character. And honestly, for about 60% of this book, nothing is happening. We're getting backstory. We're getting the characters being like, oh my gosh, I'm so drawn to you. Let's fuck. They're putting the bone in Bone Island. I will now be calling it Boner Island. She's super mature. And I think what's frustrating about this being so long and so boring, like 2/3 of this book would be 500 pages roughly. A lot to suffer through. And also we don't need to do as much world building because we've already established a lot of stuff. It was cool that a lot of the stuff that was happening here got tied back into the original curse, but that all happened in the last like 200-ish pages. And then the romance, I think it was not backed up enough. I didn't see them interact enough in a non-spicy way to really feel like they had this deep, longing, loving connection that I cared about. And again, once again, I didn't really care about the characters, so then why would I care about their romance? And then the HEA was sort of a fake out where it's like, and then they just suffered. And then in like 2 pages, it's like, just kidding, they get their HEA. To just like have so much space to do so much and to accomplish so little in the end. I was just really happy that I didn't read this with the other gals because honestly, I was seeing their messages when I was in Japan. They're like, oh my gosh, the emotion. I would have been the Debbie Downer in that group. So I'm super disappointed. I will continue on with the series, but I would struggle to recommend this in the future just because I know that you would have to read book 2, and this is a 2.5. For me, which sucks. That's so disappointing. I was so disappointed with this book. And then finally, for the other books that I read that were not part of the vlog, books 6 and 7 from the Morelli Family series. Book 6 is coming home. Once again, this is a series that has to be read in order. It starts with Accidental Witness. Definitely read it in order or Only Hot Fae Men Will Die. Who will Sarah Janet Maas write about then? Read it in order. Okay, now that we have that established, basically this series follows the Morelli family, which is a mafia family in Chicago. It goes through the romances of all the people in this Morelli family. And then I think that kind of wraps up on book 4. And then books 5, 6, and 7 are sort of like the fallout, the mess that has been created as a result of all this dramatic, juicy, conniving situation that these people have all stirred up. There's like a love triangle, quadrangle that was in book 5. So book 6 is kind of like some of the fallout from that and some of the consequences of that. We had some hurt fifis. Once again, this was one of those books that there's kind of like 2 distinct parts or plots. So the first half is away from the Chicago family and is more with the Vegas family. That gets introduced, and I know that they get a whole series, which is very exciting because now I've got like introduced to some of those characters and I'm intrigued. I'm sorry that I'm being so vague, but I literally can't even say the characters' names. That would be spoilers, but there's sort of like a main hero and a main heroine that kind of arise from all of these couples. The last 3 books are primarily about, but there's also like side characters that are involved. It's a whole mess, okay? It's a lot of drama. So the first half, I'll just focus on that. There was so many times where I just like, I had the book and I had to like set it down. Well, I guess it was my Kindle. I had to set it down and just like, oh my God, this is happening. Oh my God, what is happening? We're 5 books in, she's still throwing wrenches in the mix. And I will admit, for anyone who's read the series, I did have a moment of weakness during this time. Wasn't sure that I wanted the heroine to end up with the end game guy. And I sort of was like, well, why can't you make it work with this other guy? That was very quickly resolved because you realize how bad they are for each other. They really are. Also, just how kind of like secretly and unintentionally manipulative the heroine is in like the best way. Like she goes about everything with being really sweet. She doesn't even realize she's being manipulative and everyone thinks that she's naive. I don't think she's that naive though. Fortunately, during this first half, I did grow to hate 2 characters that I really previously liked. And one of them, I really liked her because I think I identified a lot with her. She's kind of like jokey and goofy and a little bit on the colder side, very logical, which that's all tracks for me. Unfortunately, she makes a really horrible, selfish decision that really just ticked me off to no end. And then the other guy, oh, Family dynamics throughout the entire thing are sublime. There's manipulation, there's craftiness, there's evil afoot, there's spectacular banter. Oh, Sam Mariano does some good banter. That really, throughout the series, is one of those things that you really feel the family dynamics through. You wish, if I could be so bold, I would have gotten more of other people's perspectives. We were kind of in the female main character's head quite a bit, and you have realized throughout the series that maybe, not that she's not reliable, but you have realized that her perspective on people is very different. Sometimes she can't see through people's manipulations or their facades because she chooses to believe the best in everybody. So sometimes you can't tell when she's having a conversation with someone that you know to be manipulative, especially from the other books, especially when you've been in their perspective. You're kind of questioning the whole time. You're like, are they being genuine? Are they not? Are they manipulating her? Can she trust them? So I really wish we had gotten other perspectives, because a lot of times I was like, I don't know if I trust them. I've been in their head. It's not a great place. If I'm being really honest, you could probably stop here, be pretty okay, and be pretty satisfied with the series. I did give a rating of 5 stars. Now, Last Words is kind of like the final book in like the core series, truly ties up every loose end. There's like a big reveal that happens during book 6. We get the resolution to that. We have a couple betrayals that happened in the previous book. See aforementioned characters I now hate that I then grow to love again during this book. Very complicated. Those betrayals have to be addressed, and there's like one character that technically still needs their HEA and gets a whole redemption arc. Thoughts on this one? This was divided into 3 parts. The first third was so dramatic. There is betrayal, double crossing at every level, and you don't know who is telling the truth. There is like a character that's known for setting up tests, and you have no idea the entire time. Is this a test, or is this when he meets his end? You have no clue. You have no idea. And so it was just thrilling. Like, I was on the edge of my seat. I was like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? Because there's all this scheming going on. Is it legit scheming? Is it not? It ends in the most spectacular fashion. Once again, had me gasping. I was like blown away with how much that all came together. And then the second part takes a complete turn. We're away from the mansion once again. We're with another character that's kind of like off on their own. It's them kind of like rebuilding their life and falling in love. This character really needed a good redemption arc. But I will say that this kind of dragged a little, because that first part was so juicy, so dramatic, that the sedate nature of just like having a romance and having a little bit of trauma just didn't feel quite as juicy. But halfway through this part, I end up going on my trip. So I had to read this section twice. Yeah, I had to reread that because I didn't know what was going on anymore. Got caught back up. Part 3, both of these worlds come back together. The people in part 2 are back in the mansion, which you know has to happen based on the ending of book 6. This once again got very juicy. It did get a little bit repetitive because there is a main character that really just feels very bad for themselves. Took another character knocking some intense sense into them to truly get it through their heads that maybe they're not the victim, which I was just like cheering for. Thank you. It's been insufferable listening to this person just whinge and whinge and whinge. One thing I'm going to say about this series, I may have mentioned it previously, if you do not like pregnancy or kids, this increasingly becomes part of the story. It's more or less a linear timeline throughout pretty much the entire series before it's a little bit of an exception. Obviously, as the couples are getting together, they're having more kids, there's marriage, there's babies, there's pregnancy. So the further on you get in the series, the more and more of that you're going to be seeing. So if you don't like that, maybe the later books you won't like. Just a heads up. Yeah, rating of 4.5 stars. Those are all the books that I read. Not very many for you. Still managed to yap for over a half hour though. That's cool. I just wanted to give some kind of like final thoughts because I did end up taking basically a 2-week break from reading. I didn't miss it much during that time. I'm gonna be honest. I was doing so many other things. I basically, from the moment I got up to the moment my head hit the pillow, I was on the go. I was doing things. I was hanging out with my friends. I was hanging out with my husband. We were trying to make the most of our trip. It forced me to take a break that I probably never would have taken on my own. I would not have been able to stay away of my own volition away from reading for that long. The best part about it has been like I came back, and even though I was kind of midway through that Morelli book and I was like, oh, I don't know what's going on anymore, reading again was like when I first discovered indie romance all over again. Like the voraciousness with which I want to read. Everything I read just feels so good. Like every time I pick up a book, I'm like, oh yes. It's so exciting and it's so fun to feel that way again. And the sun just went behind a cloud. Oh my God, it just got so dark. But it's so exciting and like thrilling to be so enamored with reading again. I feel really reinvigorated with reading. I will say I do feel a little bit disconnected and a little bit disoriented coming back to the book community because so much shit happens in 2 weeks. I really couldn't keep up with it. I tried to post some things and still stay a little bit engaged while I was on my trip, but because Japan is 17 hours ahead of my usual time zone, it's not really possible. Like my days and nights were literally flipped. So it was a little bit hard to kind of stay on top of everything and stay abreast of what was going on. So I do feel a little bit disoriented right now. I'm having a hard time kind of like getting back into the habit of filming. I actually had to film this like twice. And also, good news, that TBR that I was so unsure about, and I was like, I don't know if I'll still read all this stuff. I'm actually really excited about all the books on there. So hopefully I'll stick to it. Wouldn't that be cool? And then maybe I'll be able to do a December TBR because I'll actually read. We'll see. With all that, thank you so much for being here. Let me know. Leave in the comments, what was your favorite book that you read this month? Have you read any of the books that I talked about? I know No Tomorrow's like a really popular one, and so is the Weeping Hollow series. So like, if you've got thoughts, let me know. If you want to talk about the Morelli family, my DMs are open. Love to chat about it with you because I have so many thoughts. Tell me everything about how October went for reading wise with you. I would love to hear anything and everything. I love chatting with you guys in the comments. And don't forget to like this video if you ended up liking it. I mean, you did make it all the way here, so like no pressure, but also like you liked it a little. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more content from me. And for everyone who made it this far, surprise, I got a new tattoo when I was in Japan. Oh, you can kind of see it. It's a crane. So that's just for you. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.